We sure do. Hey, I've just been to Bunnings and picked up a box of 1,000 worms because my brother and his kids are here for the Easter long weekend, so we've got a fun garden project to do. What are we going to do, kids?
Make a worm farm.
We are going to make a DIY worm farm for our homestead garden. So today we're going to be building a bucket style worm farm. Now you can use any kind of container or bin or bucket. The main thing is that you choose a container that's stackable. So you might have some storage containers, some actual buckets. 20-litre or 5-gallon painter's buckets are really good for this project. I just happen to have been able to free up these 60-litre black plastic bins because wheelie bins were on special the other day. So we've upgraded our rubbish system out here, which means I've got these free to use. So yep, they're quite a lot larger than what you'd normally use, but we're going full-on homestead scale for this one. Now the basics of how this works is you need 3 containers. Again, they need to be stackable. The bottom one's going to be a water reservoir. I'll explain how that works and why as we go. And the top 2 are going to be your worm farm and materials, and they're on rotation. And again, I'll explain why that's important as we go. But the first thing we need to do is drill some holes in these bins. Why do we need to put holes in the bins, do you think? What do you think? It needs to let something through. Air is actually one of the reasons we're drilling holes. You're exactly right. We're going to put some holes around the top of the bin for air. We're also going to put some holes in the bottom of the bins. Not the very bottom bin though. We're going to have a stack of 3 bins just like this. And the very bottom bin won't have holes in it. But this bin and this bin will have holes in the bottom. What do we want to go through the holes in the bottom of the bin? Water and worms. You're exactly right. Air, water and worms. So air holes in the top and water and worm holes in the bottom. So grab yourself a drill with a nice big drill bit on it, at least 10 millimeters. That's going to allow water to flow down throughout the system without flooding any one area. And it's also going to allow your worms to travel between the bins as they need to. Now this is an important part to understand about a worm farm system like this, and it's the reason you need at least 3 bins or buckets. If we were to take all of the worm dirt, it's called worm castings, which is technically worm poo. If we were to take all of that, and that's the good stuff that we want for our gardens, and we tipped it out in our gardens and we ended up with an empty bin, what would the problem be? What else would we have tipped out? Yeah, we would have tipped out all the worms. So if they've finished all their food in here, and that one's got holes in it, and we start it up there, and we put some new food in the top bin, what's going to happen?
The worms are going to go up there.
They're going to go up into this bin, and then they won't be in this bin, which means we can take it and put it in our garden. And that's how a bucket worm farm works. Another important consideration for this design worm farm is we need to prevent the materials from falling through the bins and clogging up the water reservoir below. So for that, all we need is a piece of shade cloth. We need to stop the dirt from falling through.
This thing.
You are exactly right. We're going to use a bit of shade cloth because the worms will be able to figure their way up through the shade cloth and find their way up into the top section. But if we just cut out a small circle of shade cloth, exactly the same size as that, how are we going to do that, Lily? How are we going to get that exactly right?
By putting this up against this.
Yep.
And you can draw a circle.
Yep.
And then you can cut it out.
Yep. So for the record, Lily is 10, Ollie is 9, and Elsie is?
6.
If you're 10, 9 and 6, you can figure out a worm farm. 3 stackable containers, a drill with a nice big drill bit, some shade cloth and scissors, and we're about ready to put this worm farm together. So we do want a nice shady spot for our worm farm. Ideally, we don't want it too cold. And so if I lived in a really cold region, I'd be thinking of ways to insulate this as well. But direct sunlight is going to be one of the worm's worst enemies. And particularly because we're building our worm farm out of a black plastic material, we don't want this overheating and them having nowhere to go. This little spot right back here at the back of the greenhouse gets the tiniest amount of morning sun, and then it's pretty much in all day shade. So I think it's going to be perfect. Now, because of the way way that we've decided to attach the tap to the bottom of this. So we kind of ran into some issues here with these ridges on this bin. It meant that my tank adapter wasn't going to fit nicely on the side. And so we've decided to attach it to the bottom instead. And that's fine. That gives me a nice little access point right there for my worm tea or my worm leachate, but it does mean that I've got to have some way to hold this up, and that's great anyway. It's going to make this whole system really ergonomic, but I've got to be able to keep this up off the ground. And so for now, I've got a couple of old milk crates that I'm going to stand it up on, and with any luck, I can kind of feed that through the holes in the milk crate without having to cut them up at all. We might upgrade this a bit later on to a custom frame or table style frame for this all to sit up on. All right, I'm going to see if we can make these milk crates work for us as kind of a temporary setup. We'll get the whole thing set up, and then we'll get them filled. Well, that has actually worked out really great. I'm a little concerned about it being a bit top heavy, so we might add a star picket in there just to kind of keep the whole thing balanced. I'd probably even consider how we could get this one mounted to this one, because this one never leaves the system. That's just our water reservoir, but that is perfect. I'm going to be able to get a watering can under there, open that up, get all my precious worm tea out of there, and our worm farm and our worm feed is going to go above that. That's awesome. That might be enough. Let's just see. Yep. Okay. Did you know that worms don't have teeth?
Yeah.
So how are they going to chew up all this food that we're going to be giving them, like banana peels and avocado skins? And...
They swallow it.
Yeah, but how do they chew it up if they've got no teeth?
They just the dirt. They swallow dirt, and it like helps grind it up.
You are exactly right. Do you know there's another animal on the farm here that does a similar thing, that eats seeds and grains, and it's got no teeth as well? And you guys have been helping me feed them all weekend.
Chickens.
The pigs definitely have teeth. Chickens. That's right. Chickens will swallow little stones and bits and pieces and keep it in this part of their neck called their crop or their craw, and they grind up the grains that way. So there's a few animals that use that process, and so we need some of this dirt, which has got some really nice bits in there that the worms will choose to swallow and get in their guts, and those bits, when they rub the other food that they've eaten, will help to chew it right down. Pretty cool, hey?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're about to put together all the ingredients that go into our bucket or our bin that has the holes drilled in it. So we've got holes drilled in the bottom to allow water through and eventually to allow worms up through. We've got holes drilled in the sides to allow air in when the buckets are stacked. First thing to go in, Lily's cut us out a piece of shade cloth, and so that's going to go in the bottom and just stop material falling through. If we find that the worms are struggling to get up through the shade cloth and find their way around it, we can actually just reach our hand in and pull that out later on, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, easy way to remember this recipe is 7531. So that's like 1357, odd numbers, but we're going to do it in reverse order. We're going to do 7 litres of core peat, or you could use coconut core. We're going to use 5 litres of straw. We're going to use 3 litres of compost that we've sifted. That's going to be a nutrient layer. And we're going to do 1 litre of just plain garden soil. That's going to be our grit layer to help the worms process their food. So first up, we need 7 litres of core peat. Now, we mixed it a little bit too wet. We don't want so much water in there. So I got a messy job for you guys. You ready?
Yeah.
We're going to take a handful of this each, squeeze the water out of it, chuck it in there. So coconut core or core peat, it's a fibrous substance that is going to give the worms a bedding layer. And the bedding layer is important. It's a moisture retention layer, so they'll go there when they're seeking out moisture. It's a pH neutral layer, so they're going to go there when things get a little bit too acidic or too alkaline for them. They will eat some of this stuff eventually, but probably not a lot if they've got a pretty good regular supply of kitchen scraps. So what we're probably going to find when we get to a fully processed bin of materials is that this stuff will still be pretty much intact at the end. And that's great because it's probably also going to be one of the areas where the worms will lay a lot of their eggs. So we can save this as we swap the bins out each time. All right, to that, we're going to add 5 litres. So that's one of those full of just straw. Bring that straw over, Lil. Now we'll press it in there a little bit. You don't have to use straw. Straw's a really good ingredient if you've got it. You don't want to use things like garden clippings that are going to compress down and kind of compost and go a bit manky and rotten in here, but straw will help provide an aeration layer. So we don't want to really compact it or compress it too much. We want it in there just as a way to provide additional oxygen to our worm farm. Our next layer is going to be 3 litres of sifted compost. This is a nutrient layer, so the worms are going to be able to choose from that nutrient layer any of the micronutrients that they're not getting from their kitchen scraps. All right, so compost, which one was that, guys? In the wheelbarrow here, we got 2 more ingredients. Do you remember what they were?
That's compost, that's garden dirt.
That's garden dirt or soil, yep. All right, so we want 3 litres of compost.
I'll tell you when you're at 2 litres.
So, to our core peat and our layer of straw, we're going to sprinkle in 3 litres of sifted compost. Go for it. That goes in there.
All of it?
Sprinkle it all around nicely. We want that spread out. That forms a nice little layer there. Excellent. Guys, it's just like making a lasagna. You know, mince, pasta, cheese, sauce. Better get all the ingredients right. Okay, what's the last one? We've done 5, we've done 3, we've done, 7, 5, 3, 1 litre of garden soil. And that's just going to give them some chunky, gritty bits that they can process their food with. All right, that is all starting to look a bit dry in there. And I know we squeezed all the water out of that stuff, but now we want to add a little bit of water in. Now, these are compost worms. You can't just use earthworms, worms that you dig out of your garden. We're going to find these red wrigglers in here. Let's see if we can find one. You got one for me? Perfect. Yeah, you're not afraid. These are red wrigglers. And so these worms are awesome at processing large amounts of compost. Well, we've got our worms in there. I reckon we could probably spread them out a little bit. That's going to mean getting your hands in amongst the worms. You ready? Let's get in. Let's show them their new home. Give them a little spread. Help them find all those layers of goodness down in there. So it's time to add our actual worm farm proper, so the second bin into this. But before we do that, we don't want those bins slotting in too close together because that's not going to leave enough room down here to collect a good volume of that liquid goodness. And so what I'm going to do is just prop the whole thing up with a couple of garden pavers. Alrighty. I can hear it dribbling through. It's a good sign. And look at the colour. Is that clear water?
No.
What colour is that?
Yellow.
It's yellowy brown, isn't it? And the longer we leave this, the more yellowy brown that's going to get. And this is exactly what we want. Well, it's been a couple of days. Family have all gone home and the worms are settling into their new home nicely. Over the last few days, I've been adding kitchen scraps into their system, which is the main ingredient you're going to be feeding your worms. You can add other materials, but let's just keep it simple to start with. Anything comes out of your kitchen can go in here, except for a few exceptions. Citrus and onions, they just don't really like, so that's not going to get processed. But more importantly, meat and dairy products. The process by which worms digest food is they need nature to break it down first. And if that was meat and dairy breaking down in here, that's going to introduce all sorts of nasty bacteria that we don't want in the system. So avoid those things in here. How much do you put in here? Really simple rule, 1 to 1. We put 250 grams of worms in here. So about every day or 2 days, I'm adding 250 grams of kitchen scraps into the system. Now this is where your observation skills are going to come into it. Just watch and see how fast they process those materials. If the kitchen scraps are building up and not really being processed, you're adding too much. If they're getting through them really quickly, you're not adding enough. But the worm colony or the size or amount of worms in there is going to adapt to the amount of food that you feed them. But if you stick to that 1 to 1 rule, you should be pretty right. Okay, how do I know when it's time to add the second bin? Well, you're going to do that based on when you're getting close to full. Now for me, I'm using these 60 litre bins and I feel like about 40 litres worth of basically soggy wet soil is going to be pretty heavy. And so to make it manageable, I'm not going to fill them all the way to the top. But once they've broken down all those materials and all I can see in there is worm castings, which looks like just beautiful, rich, organic soil, so brown material in there and no no greens at all, I know it's time to add the next bin. And I want to give them time to migrate up to the top bin. And so we're going to build that top bin the exact same way that we built the first one. All of those same base layer materials go in there, and then kitchen scraps. And again, through observation, we're going to be able to dig our hand into the new bin, see that that worm colony has moved up into there. They're starting to process all of those new kitchen scraps. And if we take that off and look through the worm castings below, we're going to see no more sign of worms in the bin below. Now that might take a few days, it might take a couple of weeks. Give them enough time to move up into the next bin, and then what you're left with is a beautiful full bin of worm castings that you can put through your compost system, or you can use it directly on your gardens. Now, while all of that is happening in the bins above, we're going to be managing the water that flows throughout the system and is collected in the reservoir below. We've got a lid on the top of the system, and that stops rainwater getting into it and flooding it out and potentially killing our worms, but it does mean we need to manually manage the water that goes in here. How much? Well, remember the amount of water that we added to that core peat or that coconut core in the bottom? It was damp like a sponge, but not dripping wet. That's about how much water you want to keep in the system. But don't worry, you really can't get this wrong. That's the beauty of this design, is that it allows water to flow freely throughout the system and collect down below without flooding any one area. And the amazing thing about what's collected down below is it's not just water, it's technically a worm leachate. Not really a worm tea, there is a difference, and if you want to know the difference between a worm tea and a worm leachate, I've put all of that information together, as well as some tips and tricks for how to use your worm farm in your garden system, in a downloadable document over on our Patreon page. So you could go and check that out. There's far more information in there than I could ever share in a 20-minute video. But the basics are, when you come along, you collect your water out of the bottom of that system. Do this regularly. Don't let that water fill up too much, because we don't want it to backfill up into the system. But every few days, you're going to be collecting that stuff. That golden brown, delicious material that's in there is able to be used directly on your gardens and plants. I'm going to put some of this on my orchard trees or some of my plants that are in need of a little bit of extra TLC. If you want to think about how you use this stuff, think about how you would use a liquid garden amendment, things like a seaweed amendment, for example. In fact, this is even better, because not only are you closing the loop on your own property and you're building these materials on site, so you're not contributing to a mass-produced, factory-produced product, so you can feel better about the planet for that, but the material that you're collecting in here, the nutrients, the minerals, the microbes that are in this solution are far more than what you will find in any one of those commercially available liquid garden products. In fact, I've put some information about what gets collected in here, again, in that downloadable document. So this stuff is super powerful, and you can use it directly on your plants. Why wouldn't you want to make this for your garden system? So there you go, a really simple 3-bin or 3-bucket worm farm system. We had a ton of fun building this with the kids, and by getting them hands-on and involved with it, it was a great way for them to learn about this super beneficial garden input system. I hope you were inspired by this video, maybe even inspired enough to build your own worm farm. And if you've got kids or nieces and nephews, I'd encourage you to get them involved as well. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Don't forget, there's a heap of extra information over on our Patreon page, so if you want to check that out, or just get behind this channel and what we're building out here in the community that we're building online, there'll be a link down in the description, a code on the screen that you can scan. You can go and check that out. But until next week, we'll see you later.